California just recorded more than 20,000 layoffs in 2026, and most people think that's only a job story. It isn't. Because when thousands of workers lose paychecks, housing markets start losing buyers. And when buyers disappear, prices don't stay high forever. We've seen this movie before. A city gets rich from one booming industry. Home prices surge. Families stretch their budgets. Mortgage payments get bigger. Then the layoffs arrive. Suddenly, people can't qualify for loans. Sellers outnumber buyers, and neighborhoods that looked unstoppable start cracking. Today, we're counting down 15 California cities where layoffs could trigger a massive housing correction in 2026. Some are expensive tech hubs. Some are commuter cities built on jobs located an hour away. Others depend heavily on government, defense, or healthcare payrolls that are facing growing pressure. And as we move toward number one, the risk gets bigger, the home prices get higher, and the potential fallout becomes much more serious. Let's begin. Number 15 is Long Beach. Long Beach looks like one of the safest housing markets in Southern California, and that perception is exactly why it deserves a place on this list. The city benefits from one of the busiest ports in the United States, a major logistics network, a long aerospace history, and a population of more than 450,000 people. On the surface, that sounds like the kind of economic diversity that should protect homeowners from serious trouble. But housing markets rarely care about appearances. What matters is whether the industries supporting local paychecks continue growing or begin shrinking. Long Beach remains heavily connected to global trade and shipping activity through its port operations, while aerospace and manufacturing jobs continue facing pressure from restructuring and changing economic conditions. The typical home here still costs well over $800,000, meaning buyers need strong and stable incomes just to enter the market. Over the past year, price growth has slowed significantly, and homes are spending longer on the market than they were during the buying frenzy of recent years. If layoffs accelerate across logistics, transportation, or aerospace employment, Long Beach could quickly discover that a housing market built around expensive homes becomes much harder to sustain when qualified buyers start disappearing. Number 14 is San Diego. San Diego has something almost every city in America wishes it had: incredible weather, a beautiful coastline, a thriving tourism industry, and a reputation as one of the most desirable places to live in the country. For years, those advantages helped convince buyers that local home prices would continue climbing no matter what happened elsewhere. But housing markets are ultimately supported by incomes, not ocean views. The reality is that San Diego depends heavily on a handful of industries that provide those incomes, particularly biotechnology, defense contracting, and military-related employment. Those sectors support thousands of high-earning workers whose salaries make the city's expensive housing market possible. The problem is that biotech firms continue facing funding pressures and consolidation, while defense spending priorities can shift quickly depending on federal budgets. Housing prices have already softened by roughly 3% over the past year. And while that decline may seem small, it represents a meaningful change in a market accustomed to steady appreciation. With many homes approaching or exceeding $1 million, even a modest increase in layoffs could significantly reduce the number of buyers capable of qualifying for mortgages. If major employers begin trimming payrolls, San Diego's housing market could face far more pressure than most people expect. Number 13 is Sacramento. For decades, Sacramento built its reputation on stability. While other California cities experienced dramatic booms and painful downturns, the state capital often appeared insulated from major economic shocks because of its large concentration of government jobs. That reputation attracted buyers looking for a safer place to own property, and it helped push housing prices steadily higher over time. However, the very industries that made Sacramento seem recession-resistant are now facing growing challenges. Government agencies are dealing with tighter budgets. Healthcare systems face funding concerns, and economists have repeatedly identified public sector employment, education, and healthcare as areas that could experience slower growth or workforce reductions during 2026. That's important because those sectors form the backbone of Sacramento's economy. Typical home values have already slipped by roughly 5% over the past year, and many neighborhoods are seeing inventory levels gradually rise. With home prices around $500,000, Sacramento remains more affordable than many coastal markets. But affordability alone cannot protect housing when the primary employers supporting local incomes begin cutting costs. If layoffs spread through government and healthcare payrolls, the city's long-standing reputation for stability could face one of its biggest tests in years. Quick pause before we continue. If you're getting value from this breakdown, hit that subscribe button and join California Unlocked. We spend hours digging through housing data, migration trends, inventory reports, and economic signals so you can understand what's really happening across California. The next market shift could happen faster than most people expect, and staying informed today could save you from making an expensive mistake tomorrow. Now let's keep going. Number 12 is Fairfield. Fairfield sits in a unique position between the Bay Area and Sacramento, and for years, that location worked in its favor. Families who couldn't afford homes closer to major job centers moved here searching for more space and lower prices while continuing to commute throughout the region. The city became a middle ground between two expensive worlds, but commuter cities often carry risks that remain hidden during boom times. Many residents depend on jobs located somewhere else, meaning economic trouble can arrive from outside the city long before local statistics show a problem. Fairfield also has significant exposure to government and defense-related employment in the surrounding area, sectors that could face additional pressure if budget cuts deepen during 2026. Home values have remained mostly flat and properties are taking longer to sell than they did a few years ago, suggesting buyer demand is already cooling. The typical home costs around $620,000, and many households depend on stable dual incomes to manage those mortgage payments. If layoffs begin affecting both commuters and government workers simultaneously, Fairfield could find itself facing a housing slowdown much more severe than current numbers suggest. Number 11 is Tracy. Tracy exists because California became too expensive closer to the Bay Area. For years, buyers drove farther and farther east searching for homes they could actually afford, and Tracy became one of the biggest beneficiaries of that trend. Entire neighborhoods filled with commuters willing to spend hours on the road each day in exchange for lower housing costs. During the boom years, the strategy worked. But the downside of a commuter city becomes obvious when layoffs start appearing in the employment centers those residents depend on. The typical home in Tracy costs roughly $670,000, and many homeowners work in technology, finance, or professional services jobs located far from the city itself. Recent data shows prices slipping by more than 5% year over year, indicating that demand is already weakening. The danger is simple. When a worker loses a high-paying Bay Area job, there often isn't an equivalent opportunity waiting in Tracy. That means households can find themselves carrying large mortgages while facing uncertain income prospects. Cities built primarily to house workers employed somewhere else often feel economic pain faster than people realize, and Tracy fits that description perfectly. Number 10 is Vallejo. Vallejo carries a history that should make every homeowner pay attention. During the last major financial crisis, the city became one of the most visible examples of what can happen when economic stress collides with housing weakness. That history doesn't guarantee another downturn, but it does provide a reminder of how vulnerable certain markets can become when local incomes come under pressure. Today, Vallejo remains one of the more affordable entry points into the broader Bay Area housing market, with typical home values hovering near $515,000. Many residents work in healthcare, government, or commute elsewhere for better paying jobs. The problem is that all three of those income sources face potential challenges heading into 2026. Home prices have already declined by roughly 5% over the past year, one of the more noticeable drops among cities on this list. If layoffs increase across healthcare systems or government agencies, Vallejo could find itself dealing with the same combination of economic weakness and housing pressure that has caused problems here before. History doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And that's why Vallejo deserves close attention. Number 9 is Antioch. Antioch is another city that knows exactly what a housing collapse looks like because it lived through one. During the last major downturn, parts of Antioch experienced severe foreclosure activity as homeowners struggled with declining values and weakening job markets. The city eventually recovered, but many of the conditions that created vulnerability back then still exist today. Antioch remains an affordable option for buyers priced out of other parts of the Bay Area, which means a large percentage of residents depend on jobs located elsewhere. The local economy leans heavily on retail, service sector employment, and government-related work. While many of the highest-paying jobs remain outside the city, home values have softened in recent months, and inventory levels have been gradually increasing. What makes Antioch particularly vulnerable is the combination of long-distance commuting, relatively modest local wages, and a history of housing distress during economic downturns. If layoffs continue spreading across major Bay Area employers, cities like Antioch could once again feel the impact more severely than many higher-income communities. Number 8 is Mountain View. Mountain View sits at the center of Silicon Valley and is home to one of the most influential technology companies in the world. For years, that connection made local real estate seem nearly untouchable. Buyers believed that as long as big tech continued growing, housing prices would keep rising. But 2026 is exposing the risks of relying too heavily on a single industry. Technology companies throughout California have spent the past several years cutting jobs, restructuring divisions, and shifting resources toward artificial intelligence. Those decisions are already affecting housing markets across Silicon Valley. Recent figures show Mountain View home prices falling by nearly 14% year over year, one of the steepest declines among major California cities. That's an extraordinary number for a market where many homes still sell for well over $1.5 million. The people buying these homes are typically highly paid tech employees, and when layoffs affect even a small percentage of that workforce, demand can weaken surprisingly fast. Mountain View remains wealthy, desirable, and influential, but the recent price declines demonstrate that even Silicon Valley's strongest markets are not immune when payrolls start shrinking. Number 7 is Santa Clara. Santa Clara sits at the heart of Silicon Valley, surrounded by some of the biggest technology companies on the planet. On paper, it looks like one of the strongest housing markets in America. The county's median home price has climbed beyond $2 million. Homes still command enormous valuations, and demand remains relatively healthy compared to many other parts of California. But beneath those impressive numbers lies one of the biggest risks in the entire state. Santa Clara's economy is deeply tied to the technology sector, and that sector has already been responsible for thousands of layoffs throughout California during 2026. The people buying homes worth $2 million or more are rarely paying cash. Most are highly compensated tech employees taking on massive mortgages based on the assumption that their jobs will remain secure. When layoffs start spreading through an industry that concentrated, the impact can move through the housing market much faster than many homeowners expect. The pool of people capable of purchasing multi-million-dollar homes is already limited. If a meaningful percentage of those buyers lose jobs or become uncertain about their future income, demand can dry up quickly. Santa Clara is not crashing today, but it represents one of the clearest examples of a housing market that depends heavily on a single industry continuing to thrive. And that industry is already showing signs of strain. Number 6 is Milpitas. Milpitas sits right where Silicon Valley meets the East Bay, and that location helped transform it into one of the most desirable commuter cities in Northern California. For years, highly paid tech workers flocked here because it offered access to major employers while still providing slightly more attainable housing than some neighboring communities. But what made Milpitas successful during the boom years is exactly what makes it vulnerable now. The city depends heavily on dual-income technology households, families whose financial stability often relies on two tech paychecks arriving every month. When both careers are tied to the same industry, a wave of layoffs can create risks that most homeowners never fully consider until it is too late. The typical home in Milpitas still costs around $1.3 million, which means many buyers stretched their budgets based on expectations of continued income growth. Over the past year, home values have already slipped by nearly 5%, and properties in some neighborhoods are taking noticeably longer to sell than they were just a year ago. Those are the kinds of warning signs that often appear before larger corrections. If technology companies continue cutting jobs throughout 2026, many households could find themselves facing difficult decisions about mortgages, refinancing, or selling into a weakening market. Milpitas remains an attractive city, but it is also one of the clearest examples of what happens when an expensive housing market becomes heavily dependent on a single industry that is actively reducing its workforce. Before we enter the top 5, take a second and subscribe to California Unlocked if you haven't already. We break down California housing markets, migration trends, affordability shifts, and economic risks almost every single day. Most people only hear about these stories after prices have already moved. Our goal is to help you see the warning signs before everyone else does. Now, let's get into the 5 cities with the most at stake. Number 5 is Vacaville. Vacaville became one of California's biggest housing success stories during the affordability crisis. As Bay Area home prices exploded, families searched farther and farther away for homes they could still afford, and Vacaville offered exactly that. Buyers accepted longer commutes in exchange for lower housing costs and more space. For years, it seemed like a smart trade-off. But commuter cities often carry hidden risks because their economic health depends heavily on jobs located somewhere else. The typical home value in Vacaville has already declined by roughly 5% over the past year, a clear indication that demand is cooling. Many residents work in technology, government, healthcare, or professional services, positions outside the city. If those sectors continue shedding jobs, affected workers cannot simply replace their income inside Vacaville because the local economy does not offer enough high-paying positions to absorb large numbers of displaced employees. That creates a dangerous situation where households remain responsible for mortgages on homes purchased near peak valuations, while their employment options become increasingly limited. A city like Vacaville does not necessarily struggle because of what happens within its own borders. It struggles because of what happens in the larger regional economy surrounding it. And right now, that larger economy is showing growing signs of stress. Number 4 is Fremont. Fremont is one of the most expensive cities on this list, and that fact alone dramatically increases the risk. Located in the East Bay, Fremont sits at the crossroads of technology, semiconductor manufacturing, and electric vehicle production. It is home to some of the most important employers in California and has benefited enormously from Silicon Valley's growth over the past 2 decades. But expensive housing markets require a constant supply of high-income buyers, and that supply becomes vulnerable when the industries creating those incomes begin slowing down. The typical home in Fremont costs well over $1 million, placing it among the most expensive markets in the state. Those prices only work when technology employees, engineers, and manufacturing professionals continue earning large salaries. Yet many of the companies connected to Fremont have already announced workforce reductions, cost-cutting initiatives, or restructuring efforts. The danger is not that everyone loses their job at once. The danger is that enough highly qualified buyers disappear from the market to create a significant imbalance between supply and demand. In a city where housing is priced for peak economic performance, even a modest decline in buyer activity can place substantial downward pressure on values. Fremont remains prosperous today, but it also has an enormous amount of housing value, resting on the continued strength of industries that are becoming increasingly cautious. Number 3 is Sunnyvale. Sunnyvale sits deep inside the core of Silicon Valley, and few cities in America are more closely connected to the technology industry. This is a community where some of the world's largest tech companies maintain major operations and where many households depend directly on technology-related employment. For years, that concentration created tremendous wealth and helped push housing prices into the stratosphere. But concentration can be a strength during a boom and a weakness during a slowdown. The median home price in Sunnyvale remains well into 7 figures, making it one of the most expensive housing markets in California. At the same time, several major employers connected to the city have already participated in broader rounds of layoffs, affecting thousands of workers throughout the Bay Area. When a household carrying a mortgage tied to a home worth $1.8 million, $2 million, or even more suddenly loses one of its primary sources of income, the financial equation changes immediately. Homeowners often discover that replacing a high-paying technology position is much harder during an industry-wide slowdown than during a boom. If enough households face that reality simultaneously, inventory can rise while buyer demand falls. Sunnyvale's wealth makes it look resilient from the outside, but the city's heavy dependence on one industry creates risks that become much more visible when layoffs start spreading through the local economy. Number 2 is Menlo Park. Menlo Park may have the most concentrated housing market on this entire list. The city is home to the headquarters of one of the world's largest social media companies, and its real estate market has become deeply intertwined with the success of that employer. Over the years, thousands of employees used stock compensation, bonuses, and high salaries to purchase homes throughout the area, helping drive values to extraordinary heights. Today, the median home price sits close to $3 million, placing Menlo Park among the most expensive communities in America. What makes this city so vulnerable is not just the price, it is the concentration. A remarkably large share of local housing demand has historically come from employees connected to the same company. That means the health of the housing market depends heavily on decisions made by a single corporate leadership team. We already know that major technology firms are willing to eliminate thousands of jobs when economic conditions change. If another significant round of layoffs occurs, the impact on Menlo Park could be disproportionate because so much demand originates from the same employment source. Prices have already softened by roughly 5% over the past year. That decline may seem modest compared to the city's immense wealth, but it demonstrates how quickly conditions can change when buyer confidence weakens. A housing market built around $3 million homes needs a constant stream of extremely high-income buyers. If that stream slows significantly, prices could come under pressure far faster than many homeowners expect. Number 1 is San Jose. If there is one city that represents the entire story of this video, it is San Jose. For decades, this has been the heart of Silicon Valley success, where technology expansion, rising salaries, and endless home price growth created the belief that the market could only move in one direction. That belief is now being tested in real time. The median home price in San Jose sits around $1.5 million, which already requires extremely high household income levels, often supported by 2 tech salaries in the same home. That structure works perfectly during hiring booms, but it becomes fragile the moment layoffs begin to spread across the industry. Over the past few years, technology companies have cut hundreds of thousands of jobs across California, and the shift toward AI and cost efficiency has changed how many roles are valued and replaced. What makes San Jose especially exposed is that it is not dependent on one employer, but on one entire industry. When tech slows, everything slows at once. Demand weakens across the board, and the buyer pool for high-priced homes starts shrinking at the same time inventory rises. Even a small wave of layoffs can create a noticeable imbalance in a market this expensive. Right now, the housing market is still holding. Prices are still high, and confidence remains strong. But San Jose is the clearest example of what happens when a city's entire housing system is built on a single industry that is no longer growing at the same pace. And that is why it sits at the center of this entire risk story. Now, I want to hear from you. Which city on this list do you think faces the biggest risk in 2026? Do you believe California's housing market will absorb these layoffs and keep moving forward? Or are we looking at the early stages of a much larger correction? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one. And if you enjoy detailed California housing market analysis like this, make sure you subscribe to California Unlocked. We cover the biggest housing trends, relocation opportunities, market risks, and cost of living changes across the state almost every single day. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Take care, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next video.